My name is Caitlin Reed. I just turned 18. On the afternoon of my birthday, my mother didn't bake a cake. She handed me 2 black trash bags on the front porch and said, "We did our part. The state stipend stopped today, and so does our obligation. Harper needs the closet space." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I picked up the bags, turned my back on the only home I ever knew, and walked 3 miles in the Louisiana rain. I thought being thrown away on my birthday was the peak of my family's cruelty. I thought I knew exactly how little I mattered to them. I was wrong. The real nightmare arrived at my cheap motel room at 2 minutes to midnight, carried by a courier holding a wax-sealed envelope. Before I tell you what was inside that letter and the ticking clock it started, take a second to subscribe to Aura Vengeance. Drop a comment telling me your age and if your family ever treated you like a transaction. Now let me take you back to that humid Tuesday afternoon in Baton Rouge. I am walking up the brick driveway of my adoptive parents' house. My uniform shirt clings to my back after a 9-hour shift doing data entry at a local accounting firm. The air smells like cut grass and hot asphalt. My sister Harper's white BMW sits in the shade of the carport. The house is quiet. Too quiet. Usually, Sylvia's in the kitchen complaining about the caterers for Harper's upcoming wedding. Thomas is usually in his study, shouting at real estate contractors. Today, the heavy oak front door is locked. I reach into my pocket for my key. The brass deadbolt clicks open from the inside before I can touch it. Sylvia stands in the doorway. She wears her crisp beige tennis skirt, a string of pearls resting against her collarbone. She holds out her hand, palm up. "I need your key, Caitlin." Her voice is flat. It is the tone she uses when returning defective shoes to a department store. I look down. Sitting on the welcome mat are 2 industrial black trash bags. The plastic stretches tight over the corners of my few textbooks and folded uniform shirts. "Today is my birthday, Sylvia." She doesn't blink. The state stipend stopped today. So does our obligation. Harper has registry gifts arriving tomorrow, and she needs the extra room. It is time you learned how the real world works. For 18 years, I existed as the ghost in their family portraits. I was the tax write-off. I was the shock absorber for every tantrum Harper threw. I was the quiet girl who fixed Thomas's real estate spreadsheets in the basement while the rest of them dined at the country club. I place the key in her palm. Her fingers curl around the brass. She shuts the door. The lock clicks. I pick up the bags. They pull at my shoulders. I walk down the driveway past the BMW and head toward Interstate 10. The sky breaks open a mile down the road. Louisiana rain falls hard and fast. My sneakers squelch with every step. By the time I reach the neon-lit motel off the frontage road, I am soaked. I pull a damp wad of bills from my shoe. $140. Money I skimmed from my own paychecks and hid under loose floorboards because I knew this day was coming. I pay for 2 nights in a room that smells of stale smoke and bleach. I sit on the edge of the sagging mattress. I listen to the cars rushing by on the highway. I think the worst is over. At exactly 11:58:03, sharp knocks rattle the thin wooden door. I walk to the peephole. A man stands under the flickering walkway light. He wears a dark courier uniform and holds a rigid envelope. I slide the security chain into place and open the door an inch. "Can I help you?" "Caitlin Reed," his tone is clipped. "Identification, please." I slide my driver license through the gap. He checks the birth date, hands me the envelope, and walks back into the rain. He never says another word. I close the door. The envelope is heavy. A dark red wax seal holds the flap shut, stamped with an intricate crest. The return address, printed in the top corner, reads, "The Estate of Julian Sterling." I do not know that name. I break the wax. I pull out a single sheet of heavy parchment. The handwriting is sharp and deliberate. The first line steals the breath from my lungs. "If you are reading this, Caitlin, it means I am dead, and Sylvia kept her promise to throw you out." I sit back down on the bed. My hands tremble, rustling the paper. Julian Sterling was my biological father. a maritime logistics CEO in New Orleans. I read the second paragraph. He left me an inheritance, $4.2 million. My heart hammers against my ribs. But the relief lasts only a fraction of a second. The third paragraph outlines the catch. A ticking clock. I have exactly 7 days to claim the money in person at a specific law firm downtown. I must bring my original, unaltered affidavit of paternity. The letter states clearly that if I miss the 7-day deadline, the entire trust defaults to my legal guardians, Sylvia and Thomas Reed. The eviction was not just cruelty. It was a calculated financial maneuver. They threw me on the street so I would not intercept this exact courier. They wanted me homeless, disconnected, and distracted while the 1-week deadline quietly expired. My entire childhood was a waiting game for this payday. The clock is ticking. 7 days. But I do not have the affidavit. Thomas keeps all vital records locked inside a biometric safe in his home office. I stare at the rain lashing against the motel window. A broke teenager against a wealthy real estate family. I read the parchment a second time, then a third. The heavy paper felt rough against my fingertips. The ink was a dark indigo pressed into the page with the kind of pressure that comes from a steady, deliberate hand. I traced the signature at the bottom. Julian Sterling. The name meant nothing to me an hour ago. Now it was the only thing anchoring me to the motel room floor. I was 18 years old, sitting on a mattress that smelled of cheap detergent, holding proof that my entire life had been a transaction. According to the letter, Julian Sterling was a maritime logistics CEO based in New Orleans. He owned shipping routes stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way down the South American coast. He was wealthy, and he was my biological father. But the inheritance was not a simple gift. It was a maturity trust, locked behind a legal labyrinth designed to keep my adoptive parents out. Julian had built a failsafe into the document. The trust would only mature on my 18th birthday. To release the $4.2 million, I had to physically present myself at the downtown law offices of Marcus Tremont. I had to bring my original, unaltered affidavit of paternity, the document bearing Julian Sterling's signature. And I had exactly 7 days to do it. I looked at the digital clock on the bedside table, 12:14 in the morning. The countdown had already begun. 167 hours left. The next paragraph of the letter felt like a physical blow. Julian explained the default clause. If I failed to claim the estate within the 7-day window, the law assumed I was either incapacitated or unwilling. In that event, the entire $4.2 million defaulted to my legal guardians of record, Sylvia and Thomas Reed. I lowered the letter. The hum of the mini-fridge in the corner of the room seemed to grow louder. The eviction made perfect sense now. Sylvia handing me the trash bags on the porch was not a sudden act of malice. It was a carefully orchestrated financial maneuver. They knew this letter was coming. They knew the courier would try to serve me on my 18th birthday. By throwing me out of the house, they ensured I would not be there to sign for it. They expected me to wander the streets of Baton Rouge, a homeless teenager trying to figure out where to sleep, while the 1-week deadline quietly expired in a downtown law office. They were simply running out the clock. My adoption was never about giving a child a home. I was an investment vehicle. They collected the monthly state stipends to cover my basic existence, keeping me dressed in thrift store clothes and confined to the basement, all while waiting patiently for my 18th birthday. I opened my cracked laptop. The hinges creaked. I connected to the unsecured motel Wi-Fi and opened a browser. I typed Julian Sterling New Orleans into the search bar. The results loaded instantly. A sleek corporate website for Sterling Maritime, articles from regional business journals, and right at the top of the page, an obituary published by a New Orleans paper 2 weeks ago. Julian Sterling, 52, passed away unexpectedly after a brief illness. I clicked on the article. A photograph filled my screen. I stared at the face of a man I had never met. He had sharp, assessing eyes and a strong jawline. I walked into the cramped motel bathroom, stood in front of the fluorescent mirror, and looked at my own reflection. I had his eyes, the exact same shade of slate gray. I splashed cold water on my face, gripping the edges of the porcelain sink. For my entire childhood, Sylvia told me my birth parents were vagrants who abandoned me in a hospital parking lot. She used that story as a weapon, reminding me daily that I should be grateful for the scraps she provided. It was all a lie, a manufactured narrative to keep me compliant and isolated. I went back to the laptop and searched for Louisiana closed adoption laws. The results confirmed my worst fear. If I walked into the Department of Health and Hospitals to request my original birth records, the bureaucratic process would take a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. I would need to file a petition, wait for a judge to review the request, and attend a hearing. I did not have 6 weeks. I had less than 7 days. The standard birth certificate the state issued to me listed Sylvia and Thomas as my parents. That piece of paper was worthless for claiming the trust. I needed the specific original affidavit of paternity mentioned in Julian's letter, the document that proved I was his blood. I closed the laptop. I knew exactly where that document was. Thomas Reed was a real estate developer. He dealt in zoning permits, contractor disputes, and leverage. 5 years ago, after a messy lawsuit with a local construction firm, Thomas hired a security company to install a biometric safe in his home office. It was bolted directly into the foundation behind a mahogany bookshelf. He bragged about it at dinner one night. He said it held the deeds, the hush money, and the insurance policies that kept his business afloat. That safe was where they kept my original paperwork. They hoarded my identity like a winning lottery ticket. I sat back on the edge of the bed and listened to the rain lashing against the window. The panic that should have paralyzed me never came. Instead, a cold, focused clarity settled into my chest. Sylvia and Thomas spent 18 years teaching me to be invisible. They taught me how to walk through a room without making a sound. They forced me to balance Thomas's complicated business ledgers to earn my keep, showing me exactly how to track numbers, hide assets, and audit discrepancies. They built me into the perfect ghost. Now they were going to learn what happens when a ghost decides to audit the house. I pulled my wet sneakers back on and tied the laces. The sun would be up in a few hours. Thomas had a rigid morning routine. He always left for his real estate firm at 7:30 sharp. Sylvia always left for her tennis club at 8:15. Harper slept until noon, recovering from whatever country club party she attended the night before. Between 8:30 and 11, the house was empty except for my sleeping sister. I reached into the pocket of my damp blazer. My fingers brushed against nothing. My stomach dropped. Sylvia had taken my house key. But Sylvia did not know everything. 4 years ago, after she locked me out of the house in the middle of winter for tracking mud into the foyer, I went to the hardware store down the street. I paid $2 to have a duplicate key cut. I sealed it inside a small plastic pill bottle and buried it deep in the soil of the large ceramic planter sitting on the back patio. I checked the time, 5 in the morning. I gathered Julian's letter, folded it carefully, and zipped it into the inner pocket of my blazer. I packed my laptop back into one of the black trash bags to protect it from the weather. I stepped out of the motel room into the humid gray dawn. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle. I had a 3-mile walk back to the neighborhood that just expelled me. I was going to break into my own home. I was going to open that safe. But as I began walking along the shoulder of the highway, my mind raced through the layout of Thomas's office. I needed his thumbprint to open the biometric lock. I did not have his thumbprint. I needed to find a vulnerability in a system designed by a paranoid real estate developer. I walked faster, my wet shoes hitting the asphalt in a steady rhythm. The clock was ticking down. What I did not realize as I marched back toward that colonial brick house was that Thomas and Sylvia were not just waiting for the clock to run out. They were actively watching the board. And when I reached the back patio and dug my hands into the wet soil of the planter, I would discover just how deeply they had rigged the game against me. I retrieved my older model sedan from a strip mall parking lot 2 miles away. The engine knocked, and the air conditioning had died 3 summers ago, but it ran. I did not drive it directly to the colonial brick house. The muffler was too loud, and stealth was my only advantage. I parked 3 streets over, hiding the car behind a dense row of blooming oleander bushes. The morning fog hung low over Baton Rouge, trapping the heat against the pavement. I walked the remaining blocks on foot. My damp clothes stuck to my skin. I kept my eyes on the manicured lawns and silent driveways, timing my approach. By 8 in the morning, the Reed household usually ran on a rigid schedule. Thomas departed for his real estate development firm in his silver Lexus. Sylvia drove to the country club for her morning tennis clinic. Harper slept until noon. I slipped through the wrought iron side gate and moved into the shadows of the back patio. The air here smelled of damp earth and the sweet, heavy scent of jasmine. I knelt beside a large, imported ceramic planter filled with ferns. I dug my fingers into the wet potting soil, searching blindly until I felt the smooth plastic cylinder of an old pill bottle. I pulled it out, unscrewed the cap, and tipped the duplicate brass key into my palm. I pressed my ear against the back door. Silence. I slid the key into the deadbolt. It turned with a soft click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the kitchen. The central air conditioning hit my face, a jarring contrast to the Louisiana heat outside. The house carried its usual scent of dark roast chicory coffee, but layered beneath it was the sharp chemical odor of metal polish. I crept forward, my rubber soles silent on the imported travertine tile. As I neared the archway leading to the formal dining room, I stopped. Sylvia was still home. She stood at the long mahogany dining table wearing a silk robe. Spread out before her were a dozen ornate silver serving platters, soup tureens, and gravy boats. She held a rag stained black with tarnish, scrubbing a large silver tray with frantic, jagged motions. This made no sense. For the past decade, Sylvia employed a cleaning service twice a week. She considered manual labor beneath her status. Yet here she was, her knuckles white, her breath shallow, furiously polishing the family silver herself. She muttered under her breath a tight, anxious rhythm I could not decipher. She was preparing for something important, a high society event, but she was doing the grunt work alone. The pristine facade of the Reed household was beginning to fray at the edges. I did not linger. I stayed low, keeping the kitchen island between us, and glided down the carpeted hallway toward the opposite wing of the house. Thomas treated his home office like a fortress. The room smelled of aged leather, expensive bourbon, and lemon wood cleaner. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the far wall, filled with hardcovers nobody ever read. I walked straight to the third bookcase on the left. I reached behind a row of encyclopedias, feeling for the hidden latch mechanism Thomas had installed years ago. I found the groove, pressed down, and pulled. The entire shelving unit swung outward on heavy steel hinges. I stepped into the narrow alcove behind the bookcase, expecting to see the digital keypad of the biometric safe secured to the foundation. My breath caught in my throat. The safe was gone. I knelt on the floor, running my hands over the ripped drywall and the exposed steel lag bolts protruding from the concrete. They had not just emptied the safe. They had uprooted the entire heavy steel box and moved it. It must have required specialized tools and hours of labor. This was not a hasty decision made last night. They had planned for my return. They had laid a trap. Stuck to the exposed drywall was a square of hot pink paper. I peeled it off. The handwriting consisted of sharp, looping cursive. Harper's unmistakable script. Looking for something, Katie. A fresh wave of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. Harper knew. They all knew. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a sudden, jarring buzz. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. A text message from Thomas. If you want your little paper, you can buy it from us for $50,000. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen. Extortion. Plain, documented extortion. But as the initial shock faded, the analytical side of my brain took over. I spent years working as a junior bookkeeper. I understood ledgers, liabilities, and the psychology of debt. I read the demand again. $50,000. That number was a glaring, flashing warning light. Thomas was a commercial real estate developer. He built shopping centers and luxury condominiums. Men in his position dealt in millions. $50 grand was a rounding error on a standard zoning permit. A wealthy mogul did not squeeze an 18-year-old girl for $50,000 unless he was drowning in shallow water. More importantly, the demand revealed a crucial flaw in their intelligence. Thomas did not know about the $4.2 million trust. If he knew I was days away from a multi-million-dollar payout, he would have demanded a fortune, or simply waited in silence for the 7-day clock to expire. Instead, he was demanding immediate, relatively small cash. He must have received a generic legal notice from the estate stating I needed my records, but the notification likely omitted the financial value. Thomas was blind to the larger board. He was just trying to bleed me for quick liquidity. A heavy footstep echoed in the hallway outside the office. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath. Thomas had not left for work. He paced past the open office door, holding a cell phone to his ear. His tie hung loose around his neck. Sweat gleamed on his forehead. "I need an extension," Thomas said, his voice tight with rising panic. "You have to give me until the end of the month." A pause as the person on the other end spoke. "I am not hiding anything," Thomas snapped, his volume rising. "The riverfront investors are getting anxious, but the collateral is coming. I just need you to stall the bank. If they audit the shell companies right now, we lose the entire project." He continued pacing down the hall, his voice fading toward the living room. I stayed frozen in the alcove. The riverfront investors. I recognized that name from the data entry I did at the accounting firm. It was a massive commercial waterfront development project downtown. Thomas was the lead contractor, and based on the sheer terror in his voice, he was hiding a catastrophic financial hemorrhage. He was over-leveraged, facing an audit, and desperate for cash to keep the illusion alive. That was why Sylvia was polishing her own silver. That was why they needed $50 grand from me. They were entirely broke. I slipped out from behind the bookcase, pushed the heavy shelving unit back into place, and glided toward the patio door. I exited the house just as silently as I entered, letting the humid morning air wash over my face. I walked back to my hidden car, my mind racing. I had a severe problem. I needed my original affidavit of paternity to claim my inheritance within 6 days, but Thomas held it hostage for a ransom I could not pay. However, I now had a weapon. I knew Thomas was hiding financial fraud related to the riverfront project. If I could access his old tax returns and business ledgers, I could find the exact shell companies he mentioned on the phone. I could use his own crimes as leverage to force him to hand over the safe. I climbed into the driver's seat of my sedan and turned the ignition. I had an unpaid internship at a prominent accounting firm downtown. If I logged into their secure database, I could trace the public records of Thomas Reed's LLCS and build a blackmail file of my own. I put the car in gear and headed toward the financial district. I felt a surge of momentum. I was going to outsmart them. But I underestimated my sister. Harper had spent her entire life watching me, learning my routines and anticipating my moves. As I pulled into the parking lot of the accounting firm, ready to launch my counterattack, I had no idea Harper had already struck the first preemptive blow, aiming straight for my only lifeline. I pulled my sedan into the paved lot of Davis & Associates. The sun had burned off the morning fog, baking the asphalt and turning the air into a thick, humid weight. I grabbed my damp blazer from the passenger seat, smoothed the wrinkled fabric, and walked through the glass double doors. The air conditioning inside the accounting firm was sharp and sterile. I needed access to my terminal. I needed to log into the public corporate registry and tear the financial history of Thomas Reed apart. Before I could even cross the lobby to reach my cubicle, the receptionist stood up. Her name was Brenda. She usually greeted me with a warm smile. Today, she crossed her arms and refused to meet my eyes. "Mr. Davis wants to see you in his office," Brenda said. "Right now." My stomach tightened. I walked down the carpeted hallway and stood in the open doorway of the corner office. Mr. Davis sat behind his heavy mahogany desk. He was a pragmatic man who valued quiet efficiency. He rubbed his temples, staring at a notepad. "Close the door, Caitlin." I shut the glass door. The click echoed in the quiet room. "I just received a very disturbing phone call," he said, keeping his voice low. "A woman claiming to be your sister, Harper. She sounded hysterical. She told me you were kicked out of your family home last night because you stole thousands of dollars in jewelry." I stood perfectly still. My hands rested at my sides. I focused on the steady ticking of the wall clock. "Did she mention why I supposedly stole from them?" "She said you are funding a severe drug habit," Mr. Davis replied. He finally looked up. His eyes searched my face, scanning my pupils, looking for the erratic twitch of an addict. He found nothing but cold, steady focus. "Do I look like I have a drug habit, Mr. Davis? Do I look like a thief?" "You look like a junior bookkeeper who shows up on time and catches errors the senior partners miss," he admitted, sighing heavily. "I know your character, Caitlin. I know Harper Reed belongs to a prominent family, and prominent families often hide ugly domestic disputes." "Then let me go back to my desk." "I cannot do that." He leaned back in his leather chair. "We handle accounts for high net worth clients. We require absolute discretion. If the daughter of Thomas Reed is calling local businesses, spreading rumors of felony theft, it creates a liability I cannot afford. I am placing you on unpaid administrative leave." Unpaid. The word hit me harder than the physical eviction. Harper was not just trying to assassinate my character. She was actively hunting my resources. She knew I needed money. If I had no income, I could not hire an attorney to file an emergency injunction to force Thomas to open his safe. If I could not hire an attorney, I could not retrieve my affidavit. Harper was starving me out. She was ensuring the 7-day clock would run out before I could mount a legal defense. "Take a few weeks," Mr. Davis said softly. "Clean up your family drama. Your job will be waiting when the dust settles." "I have less than a week," I said. I unclipped my security badge from my lapel, placed it on his desk, and walked out. I sat in my sweltering car for 20 minutes. The broken air conditioner blew hot, stale dust into my face. I grabbed the black trash bag from the floorboard. I placed my cracked laptop inside it to protect the hardware from a slow leak in the sedan roof. I stared at the steering wheel. They held all the cards. They had the local influence, the wealth, and the security safe. But sitting in that stifling car, tracing the jagged white scar on my thumb, I realized they had severely underestimated the one weapon they handed me themselves: my bookkeeping skills. I turned the ignition and drove back to the motel. The room smelled of bleach and damp carpet. I locked the door, sat cross-legged on the sagging mattress, and pulled my laptop from the trash bag. Years ago, when I turned 16, Thomas decided I needed to earn my keep. While Harper received a new convertible and an allowance, Thomas marched me down to the basement. He dumped boxes of receipts, bank statements, and tax forms onto a folding table. He told me to organize his personal and corporate filings. He thought it was grunt work. He thought he was treating me like a servant. He did not realize he was giving an isolated, highly observant teenager the exact blueprints to his entire financial empire. I spent 2 years balancing his ledgers. I saw where the money originated, where it flowed, and where it vanished. And because I never trusted the man who kept me locked in a basement, I always kept backups. I pulled a small encrypted USB drive from the hidden lining of my backpack. I plugged it into the side of the laptop. A password prompt appeared on the screen. Thomas encrypted his old tax returns with standard commercial software. He considered himself a genius, but his arrogance made him predictable. He used the same variations of Harper's birthday and his country club membership numbers for everything. It took me 4 attempts. The progress bar flashed green. The files decrypted. Rows and rows of spreadsheets filled my screen. I leaned closer, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark motel room. I began hunting for the vulnerability that would force him to hand over my affidavit. I started by tracing the name I overheard him yelling about that morning: the Riverfront Investors. I opened the folder containing his recent commercial development ledgers. I tracked the incoming capital from the Riverfront project. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dollars earmarked for construction materials, zoning permits, and labor. But as I cross-referenced the outgoing expenses with his dummy LLCs, a glaring anomaly caught my eye. Thomas was not just over-leveraged. He was bleeding the riverfront capital to cover his own failing investments. But that was a civil dispute. That was just bad business. I needed something sharp enough to draw blood. I needed a crime. I shifted my focus away from his corporate accounts and opened his personal tax returns from the past 14 years. I scrolled back to the year I turned 4, the year my adoption was finalized. I scanned the incoming deposits. There it was, a recurring automated wire transfer arriving on the first of every single month. $5,000. The origin account was redacted in his local files, but the destination was clear. A shell company named KR Holdings. KR. Caitlin Reed. Julian Sterling had been sending $5,000 a month for my care. For 14 years, that money flowed into Baton Rouge. But it never went toward my clothing, my education, or my food. I followed the routing numbers. The ledger showed Thomas transferring the funds from KR Holdings directly into Sylvia's personal checking account. He used my biological father's money to pay for Harper's European vacations, Sylvia's tennis club dues, and the mortgage on the colonial brick house I was just thrown out of. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a simple case of bad parenting. This was systematic, documented fraud. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. Poking a desperate man who owed millions to commercial investors was risky. But confronting a man with proof of a 14-year embezzlement scheme meant provoking a beast cornered by federal law. If I sent this ledger to Thomas demanding my birth records in exchange for my silence, I would cross a line from which I could never return. I would trigger a war of mutually assured destruction. I highlighted the specific rows detailing the stolen trust funds. I prepared to take a screenshot. But as I scrolled down to verify the final routing numbers, my eyes snagged on a separate tab labeled Personal Credit Liabilities. I clicked it. The spreadsheet loaded. I stopped breathing. The stolen child support was just the surface. What they had done in the shadows of that basement went far beyond stealing my father's money. They had done something so calculating and vicious that it threatened to destroy my life before I even had the chance to claim my inheritance. And as I stared at the credit logs, I realized the true depth of the trap I was caught in. I stared at the glowing rows populating the Personal Credit Liabilities tab. The stolen maintenance trust was a crime of simple greed. They wanted my biological father's wealth, so they diverted the cash. But what I looked at now was a crime of total annihilation. I clicked on a subfolder labeled Identity Management. Inside were dozens of scanned portable document formats, credit card applications, personal loan approvals, retail financing agreements. None of them bore the names Thomas or Sylvia Reed. Every single document carried my name. Starting when I was just 12 years old, Sylvia leveraged my Social Security number to open high-yield credit lines. I opened the digital monthly statements. A Platinum Visa card maxed out at $30,000. A signature loan used to purchase a luxury sport utility vehicle. High-end retail store accounts carrying balances that made my vision blur. I tracked the individual purchases through the transaction logs. First-class plane tickets to Paris, designer handbags, $5,000 spent at a boutique bridal shop just last month. Every expense belonged to my older sister. Whenever Harper overspent her generous allowance, Sylvia simply charged the excess to my stolen identity. And then they let the accounts default. They paid the minimum balances just long enough to secure the physical merchandise, then ignored the warning notices. They let the bank send my name to aggressive collection agencies. They actively tanked my credit score into the low 400s to keep Harper's financial profile pristine. My adoptive parents did not merely throw me out into the rain with nothing. They threw me out carrying a mountain of their toxic debt. Even if I survived the humid streets of Baton Rouge, I could never rent an apartment. I could never buy a reliable car. I could never secure a legitimate student loan. They built an invisible cage around my future before I was legally old enough to sign my own name. I closed my eyes. The stale motel air felt thick and heavy in my lungs. People expect anger to be loud. They expect smashed plates, screaming matches, and red-faced fury. But real, profound betrayal does not ignite. It freezes. The rage flooding my veins registered at absolute 0. My pulse slowed to a steady, rhythmic beat. My hands stopped shaking entirely. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had a safety net. I had a ticking clock and a loaded weapon. I reopened the email client on my laptop. I did not write a lengthy manifesto detailing my pain. I did not ask why they hated me. I spoke their native language. Leverage. I attached 3 specific screenshots to a new message. The first showed the continuous wire transfers from Julian Sterling entering KR Holdings. The second highlighted the exact routing numbers Thomas used to launder that money into Sylvia's personal checking account. The third was a crisp copy of the fraudulent Platinum Visa application bearing Sylvia's forged signature right above my Social Security number. In the subject line, I typed one single word: trade. The body of the message consisted of 2 precise sentences. I want the original affidavit of paternity from your safe. Leave it in a manila envelope at the front desk of the downtown public library by noon tomorrow, or these attachments go directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the district attorney. I pressed send. The progress bar zipped across the bottom of the monitor. Message delivered. I leaned back against the cheap wooden headboard. I imagined Thomas sitting in his leather chair, opening his inbox and watching his carefully constructed empire crumble into federal evidence. I thought I had him cornered. I thought the math was finally in my favor. For an hour, the room remained dead quiet. I drank a glass of metallic-tasting tap water. I paced the worn carpet, counting the steps from the bathroom door to the window. I waited for the panicked phone call. I waited for the frantic text message begging for terms and conditions. Instead, my phone buzzed with a generic news alert. I had previously set up keyword notifications for the Reed family on local media platforms, a habit from my days tracking Thomas's public relations for the accounting firm. The notification originated from a popular Baton Rouge society blog. The headline glowed bright against my cracked screen. Prominent developer daughter announces surprise engagement amidst family heartbreak. I tapped the link. A professionally shot photograph loaded. Harper stood in the center of a manicured botanical garden wearing a white silk dress, showing off a diamond ring the size of a crushed ice cube. Beside her stood a tall, smiling man in a tailored suit. I read the article below the picture. The text described a whirlwind romance culminating in a sudden, high-profile shotgun engagement. But the second paragraph made my stomach plummet. According to the blog, the joyous occasion was overshadowed by a dark domestic tragedy. Harper gave an exclusive quote to the reporter. "We are trying to focus on love," Harper told the interviewer, "but my younger sister, Caitlin, has chosen a destructive path. She recently fled our home after struggling with severe substance abuse and theft. Now she is demanding extortion money to stay away from my wedding. We are praying for her recovery, but we will not negotiate with a troubled addict." I dropped the phone onto the mattress. They did not panic when they received my email. They launched a preemptive strike. Harper's public announcement was a masterclass in narrative manipulation. By going to the press first with a fake story about my alleged extortion, they poisoned the well. They inoculated themselves against my leverage. If I took those tax returns to the police now, Thomas would simply show them my email demanding the affidavit and claim I forged the financial documents to ruin his daughter's wedding. Who would the authorities believe? A respected commercial developer and his heartbroken, newly engaged daughter? Or the homeless 18-year-old girl demanding a trade exactly as the article predicted? I had walked right into a public relations ambush. They turned the entire city against me before I even left the motel room. My phone began to vibrate continuously. Text messages poured in from extended relatives, former high school classmates, and neighbors. They called me a monster. They accused me of ruining a beautiful family moment. The screen filled with blind vitriol. I ignored the incoming messages. I picked the device back up and zoomed in on the engagement photograph. My eyes bypassed Harper and focused entirely on the smiling man holding her hand. I recognized his face from the corporate dossiers at Davis & Associates. Harper was not just marrying a random socialite. She was marrying the youngest son of the primary stakeholder in the Riverfront Investors Group. The pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. Thomas was not just paying for a wedding. He was orchestrating a desperate financial merger to hide his stolen millions, banking entirely on the fact that I would fail to claim Julian Sterling's trust in 6 days. And the only person legally authorized to help me claim it was the estate executor. I grabbed my damp blazer from the chair. I had to reach the downtown law firm before Thomas corrupted the final guardian of my inheritance. The screen of my phone lit up the dim motel room like a strobe light. Each vibration signaled another message from people who had ignored my existence for a decade. My cousin in Shreveport called me a disgrace. An aunt I had not seen since I was 8 suggested I seek psychiatric help. The smear campaign worked with terrifying efficiency. Harper framed the narrative, and the audience eagerly consumed the performance. Then a text arrived from an unsaved number. I recognized the sharp syntax immediately. It was Sylvia. Release those tax forms and we will simply say you forged them out of jealousy. Nobody believes a homeless teenager living out of a trash bag. She understood the power dynamics of a southern town. Truth did not matter. Presentation mattered. If I marched into a police station with my encrypted flash drive, the officers would look at my wrinkled uniform, pull up Harper's tearful blog interview, and arrest me for falsifying documents. Sylvia and Thomas held the social high ground. I placed the phone face down on the mattress. I needed to look at the board differently. I reopened my laptop and studied the engagement photo again. I bypassed Harper's diamond and zoomed in on the smiling groom. His name was listed in the caption as Preston Kensington. The name Kensington triggered an instant connection in my memory. During my time auditing the ledgers in Thomas's basement, I cataloged hundreds of invoices for the Riverfront commercial development. The primary equity backer for that project was Kensington Holdings. A cold realization washed over me. Thomas was currently defaulting on his obligations to the Kensington family. His real estate empire stood days away from a catastrophic audit. He needed a buffer. He needed time. So he orchestrated a sudden romantic merger of the two bloodlines. If Harper married the Kensington heir, Thomas became family. You do not audit your new father-in-law. You grant him an extension. The wedding was a tactical shield. It bought Thomas the exact number of days he required. He was banking everything on my failure. Once my 7-day window expired, the estate of Julian Sterling would automatically transfer $4.2 million into Thomas's legal custody. He planned to use my biological father's wealth to quietly patch the hole in the Riverfront ledger before the Kensingtons ever realized their money was missing. The extortion demand for $50,000 was just a stopgap measure, a quick cash grab to fund the lavish engagement party necessary to secure the Kensington alliance. My adoptive family was operating a multi-tiered fraud, balancing plates on spinning sticks and using my life as the foundation. Engaging them in a public shouting match would only play into their hands. They wanted me to act erratic. They wanted me to scream and throw wild accusations. That behavior would justify their narrative. I could not fight them in the mud. I needed a weapon forged from cold, unassailable law. I needed the executor of the estate. I reached into my shoe and extracted my remaining cash. 3 $20 bills. $60 separated me from starvation. It was enough to cover a taxi ride downtown and a few cheap meals. After that, my safety net vanished entirely. I folded Julian's wax-sealed letter and tucked it into the inner lining of my blazer. I hid the encrypted flash drive inside my sock. I left the heavy trash bag hidden beneath the motel bed, taking only what I needed to survive the next few hours. The Louisiana afternoon sun beat down on the pavement as I flagged a passing cab on the frontage road. The ride to the financial district passed in a blur of strip malls and sluggish traffic. I watched the reflection of the city slide across the smudged window glass. My pulse maintained a steady, measured rhythm. The taxi deposited me in front of a sleek glass tower in the center of downtown Baton Rouge. I pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby air was sharp and chilled, a stark contrast to the stifling humidity outside. I checked the building directory. Tremont and Associates occupied the entire 14th floor. The elevator ride felt impossibly slow. The metal doors parted, revealing a reception area designed to intimidate. Polished marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. Abstract art hung on walls painted a subdued, expensive charcoal. The air smelled of fresh espresso and aged leather. I walked up to the reception desk. A woman wearing a tailored silk blouse looked up from her dual monitors. Her eyes darted over my damp hair, the wrinkles in my thrift store blazer, and my scuffed sneakers. She calculated my net worth in a fraction of a second and clearly found the total lacking. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "I am here to see Marcus Tremont. Do you have an appointment?" I placed Julian's heavy parchment letter on the polished marble counter. He is expecting me. My name is Caitlin Reed. The receptionist glanced at the intricate wax seal. Her posture shifted slightly. She picked up a desk phone, pressed a single button, and spoke in hushed tones. I watched her eyes widen briefly before she hung up. "Mr. Tremont will see you now," she said, gesturing toward a long hallway lined with frosted glass doors. "Last office on the right." I walked down the corridor. My footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet. I visualized the upcoming conversation. I planned to lay out the extortion demand, hand over Julian's letter, and request an emergency injunction to retrieve my affidavit from the biometric safe. Marcus Tremont was a sworn officer of the court. He was legally bound to protect the integrity of the estate. With his authority, I could bypass Sylvia and Thomas entirely. I reached the heavy oak door at the end of the hall. A small brass plaque bore the name Marcus Tremont, Senior Partner. I turned the brass handle and pushed the door inward. The corner office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the slow-moving currents of the Mississippi River. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across a vast mahogany desk. Marcus Tremont sat behind it. He wore a severe pinstripe suit, his gray hair neatly parted. But my focus did not remain on the lawyer. Sitting in one of the two plush leather client chairs facing the desk with his legs casually crossed was a man wearing a familiar silver watch. Thomas Reed turned his head toward the door. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He looked at me and smiled. It was the slow, satisfied smirk of a predator watching a trapped animal wander directly into a snare. My stomach dropped, plunging into an icy void. The sanctuary I sought was already occupied by the architect of my ruin. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing off the hallway. The silence in the corner office felt absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the central air conditioning. I kept my hands at my sides. I did not flinch. I did not demand to know why Thomas was sitting in the exact chair I had planned to occupy. Panic is a currency I stopped spending a long time ago. Marcus Tremont shifted in his high-backed leather chair. He adjusted his silk tie, his gaze dropping to the stack of manila folders scattered across his desk. He refused to look me in the eye. Caitlin, the lawyer, began. His voice carried a practiced professional smoothness, but a slight tremor betrayed his nerves. "Please take a seat. We have some difficult matters to discuss." I remained standing near the door. I prefer to stand. Thomas let out a short, dismissive breath. He uncrossed his legs and leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. He wore a tailored navy suit that likely cost more than the sedan parked back at the strip mall. "You always were a stubborn child," he muttered. Mr. Tremont cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the room. "I received the official notification regarding the maturity of the Julian Sterling Trust this morning. As the executor, my primary duty is to ensure the funds are dispersed according to the letter of the law. However, your father has brought some serious irregularities to my attention." "Thomas is not my father," I corrected quietly. "Mr. Reed holds legal guardianship," Tremont countered, finally glancing up, though his eyes quickly darted back to his paperwork. "And, as your legal guardian, he has provided documentation regarding your recent behavior, specifically concerns regarding your mental fitness to claim and manage an estate of this magnitude." Mental fitness. The strategies snapped into brilliant, horrifying focus. Harper's sudden engagement and the planted stories in the society blogs were not just a public relations shield. They were legal ammunition. Thomas had printed the articles. He had brought the false accusations of theft and severe substance abuse directly to the executor of the estate. "He is lying," I stated. "I have a clean record. I work full-time balancing commercial accounts. He is attempting to stall the disbursement until the 7-day window expires, so the funds default to him." Thomas stood up. He walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Mississippi River. "The police report filed by your sister says otherwise," he noted casually. "A report detailing stolen jewelry and erratic, dangerous behavior. A report filed just this morning." My chest tightened. They had escalated from rumor to a formal police report. Harper had sworn a false statement to law enforcement. "Mr. Reed has raised valid concerns regarding your capacity to sign binding legal documents." Tremont added, his voice dropping an octave. "In cases where the beneficiary is deemed a risk to themselves or others, the executor has the authority to delay the transfer of assets pending a psychological evaluation. A psychological evaluation takes weeks to schedule and complete. I only had 6 days left. If Tremont paused the disbursement, the clock would run out. The default clause would trigger. Thomas would win. I looked closely at Marcus Tremont. He was a senior partner at a prestigious firm. He managed millions in assets. Yet he sat behind his massive mahogany desk, sweating slightly under the air conditioning, deferring entirely to a commercial real estate developer. Thomas was a big fish in Baton Rouge, but he was currently drowning in debt to the Kensington family. Why was a powerful estate lawyer bowing to a man on the brink of financial ruin? Unless Thomas knew something. Unless Thomas held leverage over Tremont as well. I realized in that moment I was standing in a room with 2 men who were operating entirely out of fear. Tremont was compromised. He was terrified of whatever local influence or blackmail Thomas wielded. The lawyer, meant to protect my biological father's will, was actively helping dismantle it. "I will subpoena my original affidavit of paternity," I told Tremont, keeping my voice steady. "I will file an emergency injunction to force Thomas to open the safe in his home." Tremont shook his head slowly. "Without a verified income, you cannot retain counsel to file that injunction, Caitlin. And given the current police investigation regarding the stolen jewelry, no judge will grant an emergency hearing within the next 6 days. The system requires time to process these claims." Time was the only asset I did not possess. Thomas turned away from the window and walked toward me. He stopped less than 2 feet away. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale coffee. "You have 6 days left," Caitlin Thomas whispered, his voice too low for the lawyer to hear. "And you have nothing. No documents, no lawyer, no job." He leaned closer, his shoulder intentionally brushing against mine. "Go back to the motel. Accept the $50,000 offer while it is still on the table. It is more money than a girl like you deserves. Take the cash, disappear, and let the adults handle the real business. If you keep pushing, you will not just lose the trust. You will spend your inheritance fighting a felony theft conviction from inside a parish jail cell." He stepped around me and placed his hand on the brass doorknob. "I will see you later," Marcus Thomas called out to the lawyer. "Keep me updated on the psychological evaluation timeline." Thomas opened the door and walked out into the corridor. The heavy oak swung shut, leaving me alone with the compromised executor. I looked at Tremont. He kept his eyes locked on his desk. He had abandoned his fiduciary duty to protect his own interests. He was a dead end. I turned and walked out of the office. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt suffocating. The polished marble walls of the building no longer looked pristine. They looked like the walls of a very expensive trap. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped back into the sweltering Louisiana heat. The afternoon sun beat down on the concrete. The escalating pressure was designed to crush me into a diamond of submission. They wanted me to accept a tiny payout just to survive. They wanted me to fold. Instead, the sheer gravity of their corruption crystallized my focus. If the legal system in Baton Rouge was compromised, I had to step outside its jurisdiction. I had to find a back door. I walked down the sidewalk, the noise of city traffic washing over me. I reached into the inner lining of my blazer and pulled out Julian's wax-sealed letter. I unfolded the heavy parchment and read the text again, searching for a variable Thomas might have missed. My eyes snagged on a single sentence near the bottom of the second page. I have secured a safety deposit box at the Marigny Credit Union in the French Quarter. Julian had left me an alternative, a secondary cache of information located 90 miles away in New Orleans. The letter did not include a physical brass key. It simply stated the box was secured specifically for me, under my name, and contained the truth about why we were kept apart. I folded the letter and returned it to my pocket. I had to reach the French Quarter immediately. I had to access that safety deposit box before the week expired. But a chilling thought crept into the back of my mind. Thomas had intercepted my movements at the law firm with flawless precision. He knew exactly where I would go, and he beat me there. If Thomas had read the same legal notification from the estate, did he also know about the credit union in New Orleans? I walked toward the bus station. I had $60 left in my shoe. I had to buy a ticket, travel across the state, and breach a financial vault without a key. And I had to do it knowing that my adoptive father might already be waiting for me in the shadows of the French Quarter, holding the final piece of the puzzle hostage. The Greyhound bus smelled of diesel fumes and stale coffee. I paid $35 for a one-way ticket to New Orleans, leaving exactly $25 tucked inside my shoe. The 90-mile drive down Interstate 10 offered a monotonous view of dense swamplands and gray skies. I sat in a window seat near the back, my damp blazer folded across my lap, watching the raindrops streak across the tinted glass. I was traveling away from the only city I knew, hunting for a safety deposit box without a physical key. The risk was substantial, but staying in Baton Rouge meant waiting for Thomas to tighten the noose. The bus pulled into the terminal just as the afternoon sun broke through the cloud cover. New Orleans heat is different from Baton Rouge. It radiates from the historic cobblestones wrapping around your shoulders like a damp, heavy blanket. I walked out of the station and navigated the narrow streets toward the French Quarter. The Marigny Credit Union was not a towering corporate skyscraper. It was a modest, historic brick building with wrought iron balconies tucked quietly between a boutique hotel and a closed cafe. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The interior felt like a library, dark wood paneling, polished brass fixtures, and hushed voices. I approached the solitary teller window. "I need to access a safety deposit box," I told the clerk. She asked for my key and identification. I slid my driver license across the marble counter. "I do not have a key. I only have an account number." I recited the alphanumeric code Julian Sterling had written in his letter. The clerk typed the sequence into her terminal. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. She looked at her screen, then up at my face, her expression shifting into a mask of strict professional protocol. She picked up her desk phone and dialed a short extension. Less than a minute later, the branch manager appeared from a back office. She was an older woman with sharp silver hair and a tailored gray suit. She reviewed the monitor, picked up my identification, and scrutinized my features. "Follow me, Miss Reed," the manager said. She led me away from the lobby, down a short corridor, and stopped in front of a heavy steel door. She punched a code into the wall keypad. The lock disengaged with a loud mechanical thud. We stepped into the vault. Row upon row of brushed steel boxes lined the walls. The air inside was chilled and smelled of old paper and copper. The manager stopped in front of a box near the center of the room. "Mr. Sterling left specific instructions for this account," she explained, keeping her voice low. "He did not issue a brass key. He required biometric access." She pointed to a small, square glass fingerprint scanner mounted flush against the steel panel. I stared at the glowing green glass. Confusion rippled through my chest. Julian Sterling and I had never met. We had never occupied the same room. How could he possibly possess my biometric data to secure a bank vault? I looked down at my hands. My gaze settled on my right thumb. When I was 7 years old, Sylvia was running late for a country club luncheon. I was struggling to buckle my seatbelt in the back of her luxury sedan. She grew impatient. She leaned into the back seat, yanked the belt from my hands, and slammed the heavy car door shut. My thumb was resting in the door jamb. The impact crushed the bone and tore the skin. At the emergency room, Thomas told the attending physician I was clumsy and had closed the door on myself. The injury healed poorly, leaving a thick, jagged white scar that permanently altered the topography of my fingerprint. It was a daily, physical reminder of her cruelty. I slowly raised my right hand. I pressed my scarred thumb against the glowing glass scanner. A thin beam of red light swept across my skin. The machine chirped. The indicator light blinked from red to a solid, vibrant green. The internal locking mechanism clicked open. My breath caught in my throat. Julian knew. He had coded the scanner to the exact anomaly of my scar tissue. He knew about the injury. He knew about the abuse. He had been watching me from the shadows, unable to intervene directly, but leaving a breadcrumb trail only I could follow. The manager stepped back, giving me privacy. I pulled the long metal drawer free and carried it to a small viewing table in the corner of the vault. Inside the box lay 2 items: a heavy sealed manila envelope bearing the official crest of the Louisiana Department of Health, and a simple cardboard shoebox. I opened the manila envelope first. I slid the thick parchment out onto the table. It was my original, unaltered affidavit of paternity. It carried the raised seal of the state. At the bottom, in dark indigo ink, was the signature of Julian Sterling. The Holy Grail, the single document I needed to claim my $4.2 million inheritance. I carefully folded the affidavit and secured it inside the inner pocket of my blazer. I had the key to my future. But I needed to understand the past. I pulled the lid off the shoebox. It was filled to the brim with letters, bundles of envelopes tied together with twine, bank receipts, court transcripts. I untied the first bundle. The letters were all written in Julian's sharp, deliberate handwriting. Some were addressed to me. Some were addressed to Sylvia. I picked up a letter dated 11 years ago. I read the opening paragraph. I sit in the quiet vault staring at the words, and the memory hits me with the force of a physical blow. I am 7 years old again. I am standing in the carpeted hallway of the colonial brick house. Thomas and Sylvia are hosting a dinner party. The landline telephone mounted on the wall rings. I reach up on my tiptoes and pull the heavy receiver from the cradle. "Hello?" I say softly. "Katie." A man speaks on the other end. His voice is deep, rich, and filled with an aching kindness. "Katie, it is your dad. I just want to tell you." Footsteps pound against the hardwood floor. Sylvia snatches the receiver from my grip, twisting my wrist. Her other hand swings through the air, delivering a stinging slap across my cheek. "Wrong number," Sylvia hisses into the mouthpiece, slamming the phone back onto the wall. She drags me by my arm down the stairs and locks me in the basement for the rest of the night. I blinked, returning to the cold reality of the credit union vault. I picked up a court transcript from the shoebox. I read the legal jargon, tracing the dependency chain of their lies. Sylvia and Thomas did not just hide my father. They weaponized the legal system against him. Shortly after the adoption was finalized, Sylvia hired a corrupt local judge in Baton Rouge. She filed a fabricated protective order against Julian Sterling, claiming he was a dangerous, unstable threat to my safety. Because Julian lived in a different parish and traveled internationally for his shipping business, he could not fight the sudden closed-door ruling. The state legally barred him from contacting me. But Sylvia did not stop there. The letters detailed a continuous, decade-long extortion scheme. She contacted Julian privately. She told him that if he paid a monthly premium, she would guarantee my safety, feed me well, and send him updates on my life. He paid her. Julian Sterling, a wealthy maritime executive, submitted to blackmail to protect his daughter. He sent $5,000 every single month, believing he was funding my education and well-being. He paid ransom to the very woman who was keeping me locked in a basement wearing thrift store clothes. It was a devastating revelation. I sat in the silent vault, absorbing the sheer scale of the betrayal. They had stolen my father. They had stolen his money. They had stolen my credit score. They built an empire of fraud on the back of a child. I placed the letters back into the shoebox. I did not take them with me. They were safe here, protected by my own scar. I had the affidavit. I had the proof of the extortion scheme from the tax returns on my flash drive. I was armed. I thanked the branch manager and walked out of the credit union. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip behind the historic buildings of the French Quarter, casting long, dark shadows across the pavement. I had the weapon I needed to destroy Thomas Reed. I just needed to survive the next 5 days to use it. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I had kept it powered off to conserve the battery during the bus ride. I held the power button down. The screen glowed to life. Instantly, a cascade of notifications flooded the screen. Missed calls, text messages. I ignored the texts from extended family. My eyes locked onto a single voicemail notification. The caller identification displayed the front desk number of the cheap motel off Interstate 10. I dialed my voicemail inbox. The automated voice prompted me to listen to the new message. Caitlin, the voice of the motel landlord, sounded frantic, distorted by static.
The police are here. They just kicked down the door to your room. Your sister Harper called them.
She reported a stolen diamond ring, and the officers just walked out of your room carrying it in an evidence bag. Do not come back here. They have a warrant for your arrest. The automated voice stated the time of the message, 1 hour ago. The blood froze in my veins. The ambient noise of the French Quarter faded into a dull, distant roar. Harper had not just filed a false report. She had taken a piece of her own jewelry, driven to the motel while I was hacking the tax returns, and convinced the landlord to let her inside under the guise of dropping off my belongings. She planted the diamond ring in my room. They escalated from character assassination to a felony trap. I could not go back to Baton Rouge. If a patrol car spotted me, I would be arrested for grand theft. I would be locked in a parish holding cell without bail. I would sit behind iron bars while the 7-day clock on my $4.2 million inheritance silently ticked down to zero. I stood on the cobblestone street, a wanted fugitive, holding a piece of paper worth millions, realizing my adoptive family was prepared to send me to prison just to pay for a wedding. The cobblestones beneath my shoes felt uneven and slick with evening humidity. I stood on the corner of Royal Street, the weight of the phone pulling my hand down. The automated voice of my voicemail system clicked off, leaving only the distant sound of a jazz trumpet bleeding from an open tavern door. A warrant for my arrest. Grand theft. Harper did not act alone. A standard police report regarding missing jewelry typically takes days to process through the Baton Rouge precinct. A detective takes a statement, conducts interviews, and eventually presents a case to a magistrate. My sister bypassed the entire bureaucratic chain. She utilized the political connections of her new fiancé, Preston Kensington. His family wielded enough influence to expedite a search warrant and an arrest mandate in a matter of hours. It was a brilliant, vicious tactic. If a patrol officer spotted me, my hands would be cuffed, my pockets would be emptied, the sealed affidavit of paternity resting inside my blazer would be cataloged in an evidence locker far out of my reach. I would be placed in a holding cell through the weekend. The court system moves at a glacial pace for defendants without legal representation. By the time I saw a judge on Monday morning, the 7-day window on Julian Sterling's trust would have expired. The funds would default to Thomas. He would win. I needed to get off the street. A block away, a neon sign buzzed above the entrance of a 24-hour diner. I pushed through the glass door. The interior smelled of frying oil, chicory coffee, and old vinyl. I chose a booth in the far back corner, positioning myself so I could monitor the entrance. I slid onto the cracked red leather seat. A waitress in a faded apron approached, holding a glass carafe. Black coffee, I told her. I placed a $5 bill on the table. Keep the change. She filled my mug and walked away, leaving me isolated in the quiet hum of the restaurant. I reached into the black plastic trash bag resting by my feet. I pulled out my laptop and set it on the laminate table. I connected to the unsecured wireless network of the diner, enabling a proxy to mask my location. I took a slow sip of the scalding coffee. The bitter liquid helped focus my racing thoughts. I needed to map the anatomy of their desperation. Why would Thomas Reed, a calculating commercial developer, allow his daughter to file a false police report? Perjury and filing a false report carried severe legal consequences. Wealthy men avoid unnecessary risks. They insulate themselves from the criminal code. Thomas was exposing his golden child to potential felony charges just to stall me. That level of risk only made sense if the alternative was total destruction. I plugged the encrypted flash drive into the side port of my laptop. I pulled up the dual spreadsheets. On the left side of my screen, the corporate ledgers for the Riverfront project. On the right, the personal banking records of Thomas and Sylvia. I began to cross-reference the raw data. The Riverfront development was funded primarily by Kensington Holdings. Preston Kensington's father injected staggering amounts of capital into an escrow account meant for construction materials, labor, and municipal permits. Thomas was the lead contractor, granting him direct access to the disbursement of those funds. I tracked the outgoing wire transfers from the escrow account. The money did not go to concrete suppliers or architectural firms. Thomas diverted the capital into a network of subsidiary companies. I traced those subsidiaries back to their origin. They were failing strip malls and half-empty luxury condominiums that Thomas had built 3 years ago. He was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He used the Kensington Riverfront money to patch the bleeding holes in his older, failing investments. I highlighted the diverted funds and ran a sum function. The total deficit glowed in stark black numbers on the screen: $3.8 million. Thomas Reed was insolvent. The Riverfront escrow account was empty. And the Kensington family expected ground to break on their new commercial center next month. When the Kensingtons realized the construction site was bare dirt, they would demand an independent audit. An audit would uncover the missing $3.8 million. Thomas would face federal indictments for wire fraud and embezzlement. He would lose his home, his reputation, and his freedom. The engagement between Harper and Preston Kensington suddenly made terrifying sense. It was a tactical delay. Thomas practically orchestrated the romance. By marrying his daughter to the Kensington heir, Thomas bound the two families together. A father-in-law does not call the Federal Bureau of Investigation on the father of the bride. The wedding granted Thomas a grace period, a temporary shield, but a shield does not balance a ledger. Thomas still needed cold, hard liquidity to replace the stolen money before the shield cracked. My biological father left me a maturity trust worth $4.2 million. If I failed to claim the estate within the 7-day window, the default clause activated. Thomas would inherit $4.2 million. He could quietly replace the missing $3.8 million in the Riverfront escrow account, silencing the Kensingtons forever. He would even have $400,000 left over to fund the lavish wedding that made the cover-up possible. I leaned back against the vinyl booth. The ambient noise of the diner faded away. The false police report, the planted diamond ring, the sudden engagement. None of it was born from simple malice or spite. It was sheer, unadulterated survival. My adoptive parents were cornered animals. I was the only obstacle standing between them and a federal penitentiary. This realization fundamentally shifted the power dynamic in the room. An hour ago, I was a terrified teenager running from a felony warrant. Now, looking at the glowing numbers on my screen, I understood my true position. I was not the prey. I was the apex predator in this ecosystem. I possessed the only map of the entire battlefield. I reached into my blazer pocket. My fingers brushed against the thick, sealed parchment of my original affidavit. I patted my sock, feeling the hard plastic ridge of the flash drive. I held the detonator to their entire existence. I had the legal proof of my identity, and I had the financial proof of their fraud. I was a walking bomb. But a bomb detonated in an empty forest achieves nothing. If I mailed these documents to a news outlet or an anonymous police tip line, Thomas would use his local connections to bury the evidence. His high-priced attorneys would label the files as the digital fabrications of a bitter, drug-addicted runaway. They would drag the legal process out for months, long after the 7-day window closed and my inheritance transferred to his accounts. I needed a stage. I needed an audience composed of the exact people Thomas was trying to deceive. I needed to corner him in a venue where his money and influence could not silence the blast. I closed my laptop and slid it back into the trash bag. I could not hide from the police warrant. Running would only validate Harper's lie. I had to face the arrest. I had to surrender to the authorities. But I had to do it on my own precise terms, controlling the timeline. I picked up my phone and checked the calendar. Today was Thursday evening. The deadline to claim my inheritance expired on Saturday night. I remembered the frantic, panicked energy of Sylvia in her dining room 2 days ago, her white knuckles as she scrubbed tarnish from her silver platters. The Reed family hosted an annual event every August, the Reed Foundation Charity Gala. It was a high society gathering designed to attract investors, project an aura of immense wealth, and secure bridge loans. It was scheduled for Saturday night. That was my stage. That was where the Kensington family would be sitting sipping champagne, unaware their fortune had been stolen. But walking into a gala filled with security guards while carrying an active arrest warrant was a tactical impossibility. I needed to clear the warrant first. I needed an ally inside Baton Rouge, someone who despised Sylvia's hollow performance as much as I did, someone who could operate outside the blast radius. I scrolled through my contact list, stopping on a single name. I hovered my scarred thumb over the call button, knowing that pressing it would set the final phase of my revenge into motion. I had to orchestrate my own surrender, secure my freedom, and prepare to walk directly into the lion den. I scrolled through my contact list. My thumb hovered over a single name, Dr. Evelyn Patrice. She was a retired pediatric surgeon who lived 3 properties down from the colonial brick house. 10 years ago, when Sylvia crushed my hand in the sedan door, Dr. Patrice was pruning her rose bushes. She witnessed the incident. Thomas refused to take me to a hospital, claiming the copay was an unnecessary expense for a clumsy child. Dr. Patrice walked over, demanded to examine my injury, and stitched the laceration in her own kitchen. She never believed the pristine image my adoptive parents projected. She recognized the predators hiding behind their country club memberships. I pressed the call button. The line connected. Caitlin. Her voice remained sharp and commanding, untouched by age. "I need your help," I said. "Harper filed a false police report. There is an active warrant for my arrest in Baton Rouge." A brief pause followed. The sound of a coffee cup being set on a saucer echoed through the speaker. "Where are you right now?" "New Orleans," I replied. "But I am coming back. I need to surrender on my own terms. If I walk into the precinct alone, they will hold me through the weekend. I will miss a critical deadline. I need a bail bondsman waiting in the lobby the moment I am booked. How much is the bond?" "I do not know yet. Grand theft is a felony. But I have the funds to cover the collateral." I watched a passing cab cast a yellow glow across the diner window. "I also need you to hold 2 items for me, a flash drive and a sealed state document. If the police process my belongings, those items will vanish into an evidence locker. Meet me at the diner across from the downtown precinct tomorrow morning at 6, Dr. Patrice instructed. "Do not speak to any officers until I have the paperwork secured." She ended the call. I lowered the device. I had my ally. Now I needed to finalize the venue for my counterattack. I opened the browser on my laptop and navigated to the local society pages. I checked the upcoming weekend calendar. There it was, displayed in elegant serif font, the annual Reed Foundation Charity Gala, scheduled for Saturday evening at the Oakwater Country Club. The timing was a dark stroke of poetic irony. The event aligned perfectly with the expiration of my 7-day inheritance window. The gala served a distinct purpose for Thomas and Sylvia. It was not a philanthropic endeavor. It was an essential networking function designed to maintain the illusion of their vast wealth. They invited local politicians, bank managers, and the entire Kensington family. Sylvia would use the elegant setting to execute her favorite playbook. She would stand beneath the crystal chandeliers, clutching a flute of expensive champagne, and lament the tragic downfall of her troubled runaway daughter. She would spin my felony arrest into a narrative of parental heartbreak, harvesting sympathy from the elite crowd. Thomas would leverage that exact sympathy to secure emergency bridge loans from the riverfront investors, buying himself another month of financial breathing room. They wanted a public spectacle to cement their reputation. They wanted to steal my future while wearing formal attire. I decided to give them a show they would never forget. I spent the rest of the night on a hard plastic chair in the New Orleans bus terminal, guarding my trash bag. At dawn, I boarded a commuter shuttle back to Baton Rouge. The sun rose over the Mississippi River, casting long streaks of orange across the water. At 6 a.m, I walked into the diner across the street from the police precinct. Dr. Patrice sat in a corner booth. She wore a tailored beige suit, her silver hair pulled back into a severe knot. She sipped her tea, her posture rigid and alert. I slid into the seat opposite her. I reached into my blazer and withdrew the sealed affidavit of paternity. I took the encrypted flash drive from my sock. I slid both items across the laminated table. "Guard these with your life," I told her. "The drive contains 14 years of tax fraud and embezzlement ledgers. The envelope holds my true identity." Dr. Patrice placed the items inside her leather handbag, snapping the brass clasp shut. "The bondsman is waiting in the lobby," she said. "He required a 10% premium up front. I covered it. You can reimburse me when this war is over." "Thank you. Do not thank me yet," she warned. "Once you walk through those doors, you belong to the state." The booking process is designed to break your spirit. Keep your head down. Do not argue. Let the bondsman do his job. I nodded. I stood up, left the diner, and walked across the asphalt toward the concrete facade of the precinct. The double glass doors parted. The lobby smelled of harsh pine cleaner and old sweat. Uniformed officers moved through the space with tired efficiency. I approached the high intake counter. The desk sergeant did not look up from his monitor. "My name is Caitlin Reed," I stated. My voice remained steady, echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "There is a warrant for my arrest." The typing stopped. The sergeant raised his head. He scrutinized my wrinkled clothes and damp hair. He pressed a button on his radio. 2 patrol officers approached from a side corridor. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," one of them commanded. I complied. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists. The metal ratcheted tight, pinching my skin. They patted down my pockets, finding only my empty wallet and my discarded motel key. They escorted me through a heavy security door, stripping away my remaining autonomy. Dr. Patrice was right. The system operates as a psychological meat grinder. They ushered me into a brightly lit processing room. They ordered me to remove my shoelaces and my belt. They took my fingerprints. I pressed my scarred right thumb onto the digital ink pad, watching the jagged white line distort the digital image on their monitor. The same scar Julian Sterling used to protect my inheritance was now logged into a criminal database. They directed me to stand against a wall painted a dull gray. A harsh flash blinded me for a fraction of a second. My mugshot, a digital trophy Harper would undoubtedly try to acquire. Following the photographs, a female deputy escorted me into a private room. The strip search reduced me to a biological specimen. Every command was barked with clinical detachment. I followed the instructions, staring at the cinder block wall, detaching my mind from the humiliation of the moment. I focused entirely on the numbers ticking down on the clock. They issued me a scratchy orange jumpsuit and locked me inside a holding cell. The heavy iron bars slammed shut with a deafening clang. The cell contained a metal toilet and a rigid concrete bench. The air tasted metallic. For the first few hours, the adrenaline masked the physical discomfort. But as Thursday afternoon bled into Thursday evening, the isolation began to gnaw at my edges. The silence of the cell was heavy, broken only by the occasional shout from a neighboring block. I sat on the concrete bench, tracing the grout lines between the cinder blocks with my index finger. I calculated the time. My inheritance window closed on Saturday night. If the bondsman encountered a bureaucratic delay, or if the magistrate denied bail due to the Kensington family influence, I would remain locked in this cage while Thomas inherited my father's millions. The risk was astronomical. I wagered my freedom against their greed. Friday morning arrived without sunlight, marked only by a stale tray of powdered eggs slid through a slot in the bars. I did not eat. I paced the narrow length of the cell. 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. By Friday afternoon, doubt began to creep into the corners of my mind. What if Harper convinced the prosecutor I was a flight risk? What if Thomas discovered Dr. Patrice possessed the flash drive? The walls seemed to inch closer, the gray paint pressing against my vision. Then the heavy steel door at the end of the cell block groaned open. Heavy boots marched down the corridor. A deputy stopped in front of my bars, holding a ring of keys. "Read," he grunted. "You made bail. Let us go." The iron gate slid open. I exhaled a breath I felt I had been holding for 2 days. They processed my release, handing back my shoelaces, my belt, and my damp thrift store blazer. I walked out into the precinct lobby. Dr. Patrice stood near the exit, her posture unyielding. She handed me a paper cup of hot coffee. "The paperwork cleared," she said quietly. "The magistrate set bail at $40,000. The bondsman secured your release. You have a court date next month." "I will not need it," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. We exited the building into the blazing Friday afternoon sun. The heat struck me like a physical force, but the unfiltered air tasted like pure victory. I had successfully navigated their trap. I was a free woman out on bail with my legal documents secured and the financial ledgers ready for deployment. "Tomorrow is Saturday," Dr. Patrice noted as we walked toward her parked vehicle. "The Oakwater Country Club has tight security for the foundation event. They check guest lists at the door. You cannot just stroll into the ballroom wearing wrinkled street clothes." I climbed into the passenger seat of her car. "I know." She started the engine. "If you are going to crash a society gathering and burn a real estate empire to the ground, you need armor. You need to look like you own the room before you burn it." I looked out the window as the city of Baton Rouge rolled past. The final 24 hours of my 7-day window had arrived. Thomas and Sylvia thought I was rotting in a parish holding cell. They thought their public relations shield was impenetrable. They were currently making final preparations for their lavish celebration, eager to toast their impending wealth. I was going to walk into the lion den. But I had to secure the right camouflage first. Dr. Patrice drove me to a high-end consignment boutique located in the Garden District. The racks held discarded garments of the local elite, items worn once and cast aside. I bypassed the evening gowns, the silk cocktail dresses, and the beaded skirts. I needed a uniform for war. I found a tailored charcoal suit, sharp and unyielding. The wool blend felt heavy, providing a substantial weight against my skin. It offered a stark contrast to the thin, worn cotton shirts Sylvia forced me to wear for the past decade. I paired the suit with a crisp white blouse and polished black loafers. Standing before the 3-way mirror in the fitting room, the girl who carried her life in a plastic trash bag vanished. A woman who held the financial execution codes for a real estate empire stared back. We spent the afternoon preparing the ammunition. Dr. Patrice took me to a quiet local print shop. We utilized the encrypted flash drive to print 20 copies of the commercial ledgers and the personal tax returns. We bound them into neat, undeniable packets of evidence. I slid the primary ledger into the inner pocket of my blazer, resting it right next to Julian Sterling's sealed affidavit of paternity. Saturday evening descended over the city. The digital clock on my phone displayed 7 o'clock. I had exactly 5 hours remaining before the midnight deadline closed my inheritance window forever. Thomas and Sylvia believed I was sitting on a concrete bench in a parish holding cell, unable to post bail, watching my future evaporate. I requested a rideshare service. The driver arrived in a scuffed sedan smelling faintly of vanilla air freshener. We navigated the sprawling, oak-lined avenues toward the Oakwater Country Club. My pulse maintained a low, steady thrum. I watched the streetlights flicker against the wet glass of the passenger window. The storm from earlier in the week had passed, leaving the night air thick and still. The wrought iron gates of the club loomed ahead, flanked by towering brick pillars. Luxury vehicles idled in a long valet line. Mercedes sedans, imported sports cars, and stretched limousines. My driver pulled up near the sweeping stone staircase of the main entrance, casting a skeptical glance at my stern expression through the rearview mirror. I handed him a tip and stepped out into the humid evening. Wealth creates a specific kind of blindness. Security personnel are trained to guard against erratic behavior, raised voices, and ragged clothing. They do not question a person walking with unwavering, frigid authority. I strode up the stone steps and bypassed the main check-in table. I kept my chin elevated, my eyes locked dead ahead. A guard wearing an earpiece and a dark suit took half a step forward, hesitated, and then stepped back into the shadows. He assumed I was a junior executive for one of the investment firms, or perhaps the event coordinator assessing the floor. I pushed through the velvet-draped double doors without breaking my stride. The grand ballroom opened before me. The sheer scale of the space was designed to awe. Cascading white silk draped from the ceiling, catching the glow of 3 immense crystal chandeliers. The scent of roasted tenderloin, imported orchids, and expensive perfume hung thick in the chilled air. Yet beneath the floral arrangements and the clinking crystal, I detected the distinct metallic scent of financial desperation. 300 guests filled the room, seated at circular tables draped in heavy linen. Local politicians, bank executives, and socialites conversed in hushed, polite tones. I scanned the floor. In the very front row, seated at a prominent table adorned with towering white centerpieces, sat the Kensington family, the primary targets of Thomas Reed's deception. Preston Kensington Harper's new fiancé sat beside his father, a man whose posture exuded generations of inherited power. At the front of the room, a raised mahogany stage held a wooden podium. Thomas stood behind the microphone. He wore a tuxedo that fit flawlessly, projecting the image of a corporate titan. Sylvia stood half a step behind him, wearing a sapphire evening gown, her spine rigid with practiced grace. Thomas tapped the microphone. The subtle thump echoed through the state-of-the-art sound system. The low hum of conversation faded into silence. Silverware clinked softly against porcelain, then ceased entirely. "We are a family built on trust," Thomas projected his baritone voice, smooth and commanding. "We believe that a strong community relies on transparency, loyalty, and faith. Our foundation mirrors those exact values. When we build, we do not just construct buildings, we build partnerships." He paused, letting the silence stretch across the ballroom. He turned slightly, placing a comforting hand on Sylvia's shoulder. She lowered her head, raising a lace handkerchief to her cheek, dabbing at a perfectly timed, non-existent tear. The audience murmured in collective, orchestrated sympathy. "It has been a difficult week for our household," Thomas continued, infusing his tone with measured sorrow. "Many of you have read the unfortunate news. Even when our youngest Caitlin lost her way, we never stopped loving her. We pray she finds the help she needs to overcome her demons. But tonight is not about our private heartbreak. Tonight is about the future." I stepped out of the shadows near the entrance and walked into the center aisle. The aisle stretched long and wide, bisecting the sea of linen-covered tables. The heels of my loafers clicked against the polished hardwood floor in a slow, rhythmic cadence. The guests seated in the back rows noticed me first. A woman in a sequined dress stopped breathing, her hand rising to cover her mouth. The murmurs began, a low, confused whispering that rippled forward like a tidal wave gaining momentum. Heads turned, shoulders shifted. The crowd parted their attention, their eyes tracing my path as I marched toward the stage. Harper stood near a towering champagne pyramid on the left side of the room. She wore a designer cocktail dress, her heavy diamond engagement ring catching the ambient light. She turned her head, following the gaze of the crowd. She recognized my face. She registered the tailored suit. Her jaw went slack. The crystal flute slipped from her numb fingers. The glass hit the marble perimeter of the dance floor. It shattered with a sharp, piercing crack that cut through the whispering crowd like a gunshot. The sparkling liquid splashed across the polished stone. Thomas froze mid-sentence. The confident, polished facade crumbled in a fraction of a second, replaced by naked, wide-eyed terror. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. Sylvia dropped her lace handkerchief. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. I stopped walking. I stood 10 feet away from the Kensington family table, staring directly up at the man who threw me away. "That is good to hear, Thomas," I said. I did not require a microphone. I projected my words from my diaphragm, clear and resonant, ensuring every single syllable reached the far corners of the silent, shocked room. Because trust requires transparency. The silence that followed was heavy, volatile, and primed for ignition. Thomas recovered his senses, his face flushing a deep mottled red. He leaned into the microphone, his voice sharp with panic, signaling the guards lining the walls. But before a single hand could touch my shoulder, I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer, preparing to show 300 people exactly what transparency looked like. I kept my hands visible, reaching slowly into the inner breast pocket of my charcoal blazer. The movement caused a ripple of panic across the raised mahogany stage. Security guards! Sylvia hissed the command through her teeth, her polished veneer cracking. "Get her out of here. She is a trespasser." 2 men in dark suits stepped from the perimeter, their hands reaching for my shoulders. They did not make it far. "Stand down." The voice cracked like a whip across the quiet ballroom. Dr. Patrice emerged from the shadows near the entrance, stepping directly into the path of the approaching guards. She wore her tailored beige suit, her posture radiating decades of earned authority. As a retired pediatric surgeon and a foundational pillar of the Baton Rouge medical community, she possessed a social gravity the security team recognized immediately. They hesitated, their training conflicting with their instinct to obey a respected local figure. Dr. Patrice held her ground, folding her arms across her chest. "Let the girl speak," Dr. Patrice instructed the guards, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, "or I will personally ensure every member of this club board hears how you assaulted a guest." The guards froze. That fraction of a second gave me all the runway I needed. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl accusations at the stage. Arguing with a narcissist holding a microphone is a losing battle. They control the volume. They control the narrative. To dismantle a tyrant, you do not attack them directly. You attack their supply line. I bypassed the stage entirely. I walked right past Thomas and Sylvia, leaving them stranded, elevated, and exposed under the harsh glare of the spotlights. I headed straight for the primary table in the front row, the table draped in heavy ivory linen adorned with towering white orchids. The Kensington table. Preston Kensington sat frozen, his jaw tight. Beside him sat his father, Arthur Kensington. The older man possessed the quiet, predatory stillness of a veteran financier. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, an unlit cigar resting next to his untouched crystal water goblet. He watched my approach with cold, analytical eyes. He did not know my face, but he recognized the calculated intent in my stride. I stopped at the edge of his table. I pulled the thick, bound stack of printed ledgers from my blazer. The paper felt heavy, carrying the weight of 14 years of theft. I placed the dossier directly on the ivory tablecloth, right next to his water goblet. "Thomas Reed is not a philanthropist," I told Mr. Kensington, keeping my voice conversational, yet loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every syllable. Up on the stage, Thomas gripped the podium. He leaned toward the microphone, his breath catching. "Caitlin, stop this right now. You are unwell." I ignored the amplified voice echoing above me. I maintained eye contact with the older financier. "He is $3.8 million in debt to your firm, sir," I continued. The murmurs in the ballroom ceased. The silence grew dense, heavy with anticipation. Mr. Kensington did not flinch, but his eyes dropped to the bound paper resting near his hand. I opened the cover page. I tapped my scarred index finger against the top row of the highlighted spreadsheet. "He has been laundering my monthly child support through shell companies for over a decade," I explained, tracing the line of numbers across the page. But that theft was merely a rounding error. When his commercial investments collapsed last year, he began diverting capital from the Riverfront escrow account, your capital. Mr. Kensington leaned forward. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket, slipping them onto his face. He read the routing numbers. He cross-referenced the dates. Men who build empires understand ledgers. They spot inconsistencies faster than a heartbeat. He is using your riverfront investments to cover his failing strip malls, I said, my tone remaining steady and clinical. And he is using your money to buy his daughter a place in your family. I turned my head slightly, looking at Preston Kensington. The young heir sat rigid. That engagement ring Harper is wearing, I told Preston, did not come from Thomas Reed's personal wealth. It was purchased using the diverted funds meant for your concrete suppliers. You bought your own ring. Mr. Kensington's face turned the color of wet ash. The blood drained from his cheeks as the reality of the mathematical proof settled into his mind. He looked at the routing numbers, then slowly raised his head to stare at Thomas up on the stage. The financier's eyes narrowed into slits of pure, lethal calculation. Thomas broke. The polished facade shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. "She is insane," Thomas shouted into the microphone. His voice cracked, losing its smooth baritone quality, pitching upward into a frantic, desperate shriek. The sudden volume triggered a harsh wave of audio feedback. The high-pitched squeal caused half the room to cover their ears. "She is a thief," Thomas roared over the ringing sound system. "She is a runaway addict trying to extort us. Guards, remove her immediately. She forged those documents." I turned my back on the Kensington table. I faced the sea of wide, shocked eyes filling the ballroom. 300 members of the Baton Rouge elite sat immobilized in their chairs. "I have the bank records," I told the crowd, lifting a second bound packet from my pocket and holding it up for the room to see. The bank statements carry the official seals of the financial institutions. They show the exact path of the stolen funds from the Riverfront project into Sylvia's personal checking accounts. Sylvia backed away from the podium. Her sapphire evening gown seemed to swallow her shrinking frame. She raised her hands to her mouth, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. "And I have more than just ledgers," I continued, my voice cutting through the lingering echo of the microphone feedback. I reached into my pocket one final time. I withdrew a bundle of old, weathered envelopes tied together with twine. I retrieved them from the shoebox in the credit union vault just yesterday. I held the letters high. "I have the handwritten correspondence proving Sylvia Reed hired a corrupt judge to forge a restraining order against my biological father," I announced. "She extorted Julian Sterling for 14 years, collecting protection money while keeping me locked in a basement." The ballroom erupted. The polite, hushed atmosphere vanished, replaced by a chaotic symphony of gasps, hurried whispers, and scraping chairs. Investors grabbed their cell phones. Politicians leaned away from the stage, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Reed family. Harper could not maintain her composure. The illusion she spent her entire life cultivating was burning to the ground in front of her future in-laws. She slammed her palms against the edge of the champagne table. "You lying piece of trash," Harper screamed. She lunged forward, her designer dress catching on the edge of a chair. She tripped, scrambling to regain her balance, her face contorted in a mask of feral rage. She clawed her way toward me, desperate to tear the documents from my hands. Preston Kensington stood up. He did not catch his fiancée as she stumbled. He stepped backward, pulling his jacket tight, his expression twisting into a portrait of sheer disgust. He looked at Harper the way a person looks at a venomous snake. Harper saw his reaction. She stopped dead in her tracks. The screaming died in her throat, replaced by a hollow, broken sob. She looked down at the diamond ring on her finger, realizing the metal was forged from stolen money. The damage was irreversible. Thomas gripped the podium. His head hung low, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked like a deflated balloon. Sylvia stood frozen against the back curtain, trembling visibly under the bright lights. I stood in the center of the wreckage, my hands steady, my breathing calm. I had dismantled 14 years of psychological abuse, isolation, and financial ruin with 3 minutes of undeniable truth. The ledger was balanced, the debt was called in. I turned to walk down the center aisle, intending to leave the country club and let the riverfront investors tear Thomas Reed apart. But the universe was not finished balancing the scales. A loud, heavy thud echoed from the rear of the ballroom. The towering oak double doors at the back of the hall swung open with such force they struck the interior walls, the brass handles biting into the plaster. The noise cut through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. Every head in the room pivoted toward the entrance. The night air drifted into the chilled ballroom, bringing the scent of rain and impending storms. Someone was standing in the threshold, and their arrival was about to change the entire scope of the battlefield. The heavy oak double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They were shoved inward with such force that the brass handles bit into the plaster walls, sending a spray of fine white dust cascading onto the carpet. The sharp, concussive thud severed the lingering tension in the room. The chaotic whispering of 300 guests ceased in a fraction of a second. The silence that followed turned rigid, expectant, and brittle. A rush of humid night air swept into the climate-controlled hall. The sudden draft caught the sheer white silk draped across the ceiling, causing the fabric to billow and ripple like the sails of a ghost ship. The towering crystal chandeliers swayed overhead, casting fractured, dancing prisms of light across the marble dance floor. A man stood in the threshold. He appeared to be in his early 50s. He wore a sharp, tailored charcoal suit that mirrored the exact shade of the thrift store blazer resting on my shoulders. His posture radiated a quiet, dangerous authority, the kind of stillness that belongs to men who command fleets and dictate terms. His face was weathered, etched with deep lines from decades spent under the harsh sun of international shipping ports. Yet his features remained undeniably sharp. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from my lungs. They were gray, not a muted, clouded silver, but a piercing storm cloud gray. I looked into those eyes and saw my own reflection staring back. It was like looking into a mirror that spanned across time. Beside him, filing into the ballroom with practiced, tactical precision, stood a team of federal marshals. They wore dark tactical vests with bold yellow block letters printed across their chests. They fanned out across the perimeter of the room, their boots moving silently over the hardwood floor. 2 agents remained at the main entrance, crossing their arms, effectively sealing the exits. Nobody was leaving the country club tonight. Up on the raised mahogany stage, the polished illusion of the Reed family suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Sylvia stared at the man in the doorway. All the color drained from her face, leaving her skin the shade of wet chalk. Her knees buckled. She reached out, grabbing the heavy velvet curtain behind her to remain upright. A sound escaped her throat. It was not a scream. It was a hollow, ragged gasp that cracked down the middle and dissolved into a strangled sob. The sound of a predator realizing it had just wandered into an inescapable snare. Thomas stood frozen behind the wooden podium. His jaw hung slack. His eyes bulged, fixed on the doorway. His fingers, which had been gripping the edges of the microphone stand in a white-knuckled vice, suddenly went limp. The heavy wireless microphone slipped from his hands. It hit the wooden surface of the stage floor with a dull, amplified thud. The impact sent a shockwave through the sound system, followed instantly by a piercing, high-pitched shriek of audio feedback. The screech tore through the ballroom, forcing the elite guests in the front rows to wince and cover their ears. Thomas did not move to pick it up. He shrank backward, his broad shoulders curling inward, reducing his physical presence to that of a frightened, cornered animal. The man in the doorway began to walk. He stepped onto the center aisle, following the exact path I had taken moments earlier. As he moved forward, the sea of wealthy investors, local politicians, and socialites shrank back in their chairs. The crowd parted, clearing a wide berth for him, and the 2 federal agents walking closely at his heels. It was Julian Sterling, my biological father. The man whose estate had sent me the wax-sealed letter in the middle of a rainstorm. the man I had mourned in a cheap motel room just days ago. He did not look dead. He looked like a man who had spent the last 10 years engineering a flawless, devastating trap. Julian stops a few feet away from the Kensington table. He stood shoulder to shoulder with me. We did not speak. We did not exchange a dramatic embrace. The battlefield was still active. But he turned his head, looked down at me, and offered a single, imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the war I had just waged on his behalf. Then Julian shifted his focus entirely to the stage, his gray eyes locked onto Sylvia. "You should have checked the paperwork closer, Sylvia," Julian said. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with a calm, lethal resonance that carried easily over the hushed crowd. The words struck the stage with the force of physical blows. "But greed always makes you sloppy," Julian continued, his gaze drifting from Sylvia to Thomas. The missing pieces of the puzzle began to snap together in my mind, forming a clear, undeniable picture. Julian Sterling had not faked his own death. A man in his position, overseeing a vast maritime logistics empire, does not commit securities fraud by faking a mortality record. That would jeopardize his entire fleet and trigger international banking alarms. The truth was far more sinister, and it originated directly from the podium. 3 months ago, Julian was deep in the remote regions of South America, overseeing the development of a new maritime shipping route along the coast. He was operating in an area devoid of reliable cellular service or secure internet access. He was practically cut off from the Northern Hemisphere. Thomas and Sylvia monitored his movements. They tracked his international travel. They knew his communication blackout presented a rare, fleeting window of opportunity. Thomas was drowning in the riverfront debt. The Kensington family was demanding progress. My 18th birthday was rapidly approaching, meaning my legal custody would expire, taking their leverage with it. They needed access to the Julian Sterling Maturity Trust, but the funds were locked tight behind an ironclad legal firewall. The only mechanism that could prematurely trigger the transfer of the trust into their custody was the death of the grantor. So Sylvia and Thomas manufactured a ghost. They utilized a disgraced, corrupt clerk in a neighboring parish court. They paid cash to file a fraudulent declaration of death in absentia. They submitted fabricated documents claiming Julian Sterling had been lost at sea during a severe tropical storm off the South American coast. They leveraged their high society status and their political connections to push the paperwork through the local bureaucracy without a standard waiting period. They forged a death certificate. They submitted that forged certificate to the Louisiana State Tax Board and the estate attorneys, intending to crack open the $4.2 million trust before I turned 18. They thought they had outsmarted a phantom. They thought Julian would remain lost in the deep jungle long enough for them to drain the accounts, patch their Ponzi scheme, and cover their tracks. They were wrong. When you file fraudulent mortality documents across state lines to claim a multi-million-dollar trust, you do not just commit a local misdemeanor. You commit wire fraud. You commit mail fraud. You commit federal financial crimes. By filing that death certificate, Thomas and Sylvia pulled the trigger on their own execution. They alerted the federal government. And Julian Sterling was not lost. Julian stood in the center of the ballroom, flanked by the very federal agents Thomas and Sylvia had unwittingly invited into their lives. The trap was sprung. The steel jaws were shut tight. I looked at Arthur Kensington sitting at the front table. The older financier stared at the federal marshals, then looked down at the printed ledgers I had placed near his water glass. He reached out and slowly closed the cover of the dossier. He understood the reality of the situation. His investment money was gone, swallowed by a criminal enterprise that was currently being dismantled by the United States government. He stood up, signaled his son Preston, and stepped away from the table, physically distancing his family from the toxic fallout of the Reed Empire. Up on the stage, Thomas tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "This is a misunderstanding," Thomas stammered, his voice weak and trembling without the aid of the microphone. "We received a report, a maritime report. We thought you were gone, Julian. We were only trying to protect Caitlin." You were trying to protect your crumbling strip malls, Julian countered, his tone turning to ice. You threw my daughter onto the street the moment you thought the money was secure. Julian turned to the lead federal marshal standing to his right. The agent gave a short, affirmative nod. I watched the scenario unfold, a deep sense of poetic justice settling into my chest. But a lingering question gnawed at the edges of my logic. If Julian was alive and the federal government was building a case, why did the courier deliver the midnight letter forcing me into a 7-day sprint for my life? Why did the estate executor turn me away? I looked back toward the ballroom entrance, searching for the missing link. The answer stepped through the double doors, adjusting his silk tie, holding a thick briefcase under his arm. And his presence revealed the final staggering layer of the sting operation. Marcus Tremont walked through the double doors, adjusting his silk tie. He carried a thick leather briefcase under his right arm. He did not possess the nervous, sweating demeanor I witnessed in his corner office 2 days ago. He moved with a crisp, undeniable confidence, walking straight down the center aisle to stand beside Julian Sterling and the federal marshals. He opened his briefcase, extracting a stack of federal warrants. The final piece of the puzzle locked into place. Marcus Tremont was never a compromised coward bending to the will of a local real estate developer. He was a highly specialized estate attorney retained directly by Julian Sterling. He was the inside man. Julian turned away from the stage and looked at me. The harsh lines around his mouth softened. The cold, stormy gray of his eyes warmed, revealing a profound, aching relief. "Hello, Caitlin," Julian said softly, his voice carrying the same rich tone I remembered from that intercepted phone call a decade ago. "I am deeply sorry for the 7-day clock. I am sorry I had to let them throw you out." He placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "But I needed them to commit mail fraud, extortion, and perjury on the official record," Julian explained, gesturing toward the stage where Thomas and Sylvia stood immobilized by terror. "And I needed them to do it while the Federal Bureau of Investigation was watching." The entire week had not been a desperate scramble for survival. It was a highly coordinated, meticulously planned stress test. When Sylvia filed the forged death certificate while Julian was in South America, it triggered an automatic alert at Marcus Tremont's law firm. Tremont immediately contacted Julian via satellite phone. Julian realized his enemies had finally overplayed their hand. But simply proving he was alive would only result in a minor slap on the wrist for Thomas and Sylvia. They would hire expensive defense attorneys, claim a bureaucratic error, and continue to shield themselves behind their local wealth and influence. They would remain a perpetual threat. Julian wanted to eradicate the threat entirely. He wanted to ensure they could never touch me again. To achieve that, he needed them to escalate. He needed them to act out of pure, unadulterated desperation. So Julian instructed Tremont to play along. Tremont accepted the forged death certificate and initiated the probate process, signaling to Thomas that the $4.2 million trust was unlocked and vulnerable. Then Julian sent the midnight courier. The wax-sealed letter was a catalyst. Julian knew Sylvia would throw me out of the house to prevent me from claiming the funds. He knew Thomas would panic when he realized I had a 7-day window to secure the inheritance before the default clause activated. The ticking clock forced Thomas to act erratically. When Thomas demanded $50,000 in exchange for my affidavit, Julian's private investigators intercepted the digital communication. When Harper filed the false police report regarding the stolen diamond ring, the federal agents logged the perjury. When Thomas marched into Tremont's office to question my mental fitness, Tremont recorded the entire conversation, establishing a clear intent to defraud an estate. Every move my adoptive parents made over the past 7 days was documented, categorized, and filed into a federal indictment. I was the bait, and they swallowed the hook whole. I looked at Tremont. The lawyer offered a slight apologetic nod. "Your father instructed me to turn you away," Tremont said quietly. "If I had helped you secure the affidavit, Thomas would have retreated. He needed to believe he was winning, so he would commit the final, fatal errors." I turned my gaze back to the stage. The lead federal marshal ascended the wooden steps flanked by 2 armed agents. Thomas Reed, the marshal, stated, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and filing fraudulent municipal documents. The agent pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Thomas did not fight. The fight had drained out of him the moment Arthur Kensington walked away from the table. He extended his wrists, his shoulders slumped in total defeat. The metal ratcheted tight. The sound carried across the room, a sharp mechanical click that severed 14 years of stolen authority. A second agent approached Sylvia. Sylvia Reed, the agent, commanded, "You are under arrest for extortion, forgery, and filing a false police report. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Sylvia recoiled. She pressed her back against the heavy velvet curtain, her sapphire evening gown shimmering under the stage lights. "No," she gasped, shaking her head frantically. "No, this is a mistake. I am a board member. I am hosting this event. You cannot do this here." She looked out at the sea of guests. 300 members of the Baton Rouge elite stared back at her in stony silence. The people she spent a decade trying to impress, the friends she bought with stolen child support, offered nothing but cold, judging stares. They watched her ruin with the morbid fascination of spectators at a car crash. The social shield she relied upon had evaporated. The agent grabbed her arms, spinning her around. The cuffs locked around her wrists, binding her hands over the delicate silk of her gown. Down on the floor, near the shattered remains of the champagne flute, Harper finally broke. The reality of the situation crashed down upon her. The golden child, the protected asset, watched her entire universe collapse. She looked at her parents standing in handcuffs on the stage. Then she turned toward the Kensington table, seeking a lifeline. Preston Harper cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. She reached out, stepping toward her fiancé. "Preston, do something. Call your father's lawyers. Tell them this is a mistake." Preston Kensington backed away so quickly, his chair tipped over and crashed onto the marble floor. "Do not touch me," Preston spat, holding his hands up as if warding off a physical contagion. "My family is done with you. We are done with this entire fraudulent circus." He turned his back on her and walked rapidly toward the exit, following his father out of the ballroom. His departure instantly severed the engagement, nullifying the social contract Thomas had banked his survival upon. Harper was suddenly radioactive. No prominent family in the city would ever associate with her again. She stood alone in the center of the dance floor, her hands covering her face, emitting a high, keening wail that went entirely ignored by the surrounding crowd. The federal marshals began to escort Thomas and Sylvia down the wooden steps of the stage. They marched the disgraced couple down the center aisle, parading them past the silent, staring guests. They reached the spot where I stood beside Julian. The procession halted for a brief moment. Thomas refused to lift his head. He stared at the polished floorboards, thoroughly broken. Sylvia, however, raised her chin. Her eyes blazed with a toxic mixture of hatred and terror. She looked at me, searching for a trace of sorrow, hoping to inflict one final wound. I did not scream. I did not hurl insults. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who still cared. I reached down and picked up the heavy black trash bag I had carried with me for the past 7 days. The bag that held my laptop, my thrift store clothes, and the remnants of the life they tried to throw away. I walked over to Sylvia. I stood inches from her face. I dropped the black plastic bag. It hit the hardwood floor right at the tip of her expensive designer shoes. "We did our part," I whispered, echoing the exact words she used when she kicked me out into the rain. I turned my back on her. The federal agents pushed her forward, marching my adoptive parents out of the ballroom and into the humid Louisiana night toward the waiting squad cars. The immediate threat was neutralized. The empire was dismantled. But the fallout from a controlled demolition always requires a meticulous cleanup operation. The Kensingtons still wanted their stolen capital, the local authorities still needed to process the arrest warrants, and I still held a sealed affidavit of paternity and a $4.2 million trust that required my signature before midnight. The red and blue emergency lights of the police cruisers faded into the humid Louisiana night. I stood on the stone steps of the Oakwater Country Club alongside Julian Sterling and Marcus Tremont. We did not linger to watch the club staff sweep up the shattered crystal on the ballroom floor. The chaotic aftermath belonged to the authorities. We possessed a rigid deadline to meet. Tremont drove us back to his downtown office. The digital clock on his mahogany desk displayed 11:15. 45 minutes remained before my 18th birthday officially concluded. I sat in the same leather client chair where Thomas had smirked at me just 48 hours prior. I unbuttoned the inner pocket of my charcoal blazer. I withdrew the sealed affidavit of paternity. I placed it on the desk. Tremont verified the raised state seal. He produced a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase. I picked up a heavy fountain pen. I signed my name 14 times. The metal tips scratched against the parchment, a quiet rhythmic sound that sealed my future. At 11:42, the ink dried. The $4,200,000 maturity trust transferred securely into my legal possession. The 7-day countdown hit 0. The board reset. That was 3 years ago. Today, the air smells of salt water and diesel fuel. I stand near the floor-to-ceiling windows of a corner office overlooking the port of New Orleans. Cargo ships drift along the muddy currents of the Mississippi River, carrying steel shipping containers to destinations across the globe. I wear a tailored Navy suit. I hold a ceramic mug filled with dark roast chicory coffee. My name is painted in sharp gold lettering on the frosted glass door behind me. Director of Financial Operations, Sterling Maritime Logistics. The fallout from the charity gala dismantled the Reed family with surgical precision. The federal government does not negotiate with local real estate developers. When the investigators audited the riverfront escrow accounts and discovered the diverted Kensington capital, the structural integrity of Thomas Reed vanished. He and Sylvia faced a mountain of undeniable evidence. The forged death certificate alone guaranteed a lengthy prison sentence. They did not risk a public trial. The prospect of having their crimes broadcast across state news networks terrified them more than the actual punishment. They accepted federal plea deals. The judge handed down identical sentences: 7 years in a medium-security correctional facility. The universe has a distinct poetic sense of humor. Thomas and Sylvia spent a decade treating me like a ledger. They forced me to balance their fraudulent accounts in a damp basement. Today they perform a remarkably similar task. The federal prison assigns labor to all inmates. My adoptive parents currently manage the inventory sheets for the prison commissary and the facility laundry services. They count bars of soap, standard-issue jumpsuits, and packets of instant coffee. Their daily work is audited by strict state wardens. They exist under a microscope. Surrounded by cinder block walls and fluorescent lights stripped of their pearls and tailored tuxedos, they can never skim a single dime again. They are nothing but numbers in a system they cannot manipulate. The Golden Child experienced a different kind of imprisonment. Harper built her entire identity on social currency. When the Kensington family severed the engagement, the Baton Rouge elite treated her like a walking contagion. Her friends stopped returning text messages. The country club quietly revoked her membership. The bank foreclosed on the colonial brick house to satisfy the outstanding corporate debts. She was left with a closet full of designer dresses and 0 marketable skills. She needed a paycheck to survive. In a twist of dark irony, she found employment at Tremont and Associates. Marcus Tremont hired her as a front desk receptionist. The girl who once bragged about her impending wealth now answers a multi-line telephone system. She schedules appointments. She organizes the mailroom. Every morning, she walks down the polished marble corridor and fetches coffee for the exact lawyer who helped orchestrate the downfall of her parents. She earns minimum wage. Sometimes my cell phone vibrates on my desk. The caller identification displays her name. I look at the glowing screen. I imagine her sitting in the break room clutching a paper cup wanting to apologize. Or perhaps she wants to ask for a loan. I let it ring. Forgiveness is a noble concept, but it is not a requirement for survival. I do not owe her my peace. The phone stops vibrating. The screen goes dark. I return to my work. My relationship with Julian Sterling did not transform into a cinematic fairy tale. You cannot erase 18 years of absence with a dramatic rescue. We are two people who share the same storm cloud gray eyes and a mutual appreciation for silence. We do not exchange hollow sentiments. We do not force an artificial father-daughter dynamic. We built a partnership rooted in unvarnished truth. I did not merely take the inheritance and vanish. I invested the capital back into his shipping fleet. We became business partners. I managed the financial ledgers for his international routes. Every Wednesday morning he walks into my office. He sits in the chair opposite my desk. We drink coffee. We review the quarterly profit margins. We discuss fuel costs and tariff regulations. Beneath the numbers, we are slowly building a foundation of mutual respect. We are learning how to trust each other, one spreadsheet at a time. When I leave the office at the end of the day, I drive back to a restored townhouse in the Garden District. The property belongs to me. No bank holds the mortgage. No shell company obscures the deed. I walk into my bedroom and open the closet door. My tailored suits hang in neat rows. Crisp white blouses line the shelves. But on the very bottom shelf, tucked away in the corner, sit 2 black plastic trash bags. I washed them. I folded them into tight, unassuming squares. I keep them there as an anchor. Whenever the stress of a corporate merger weighs on my shoulders, or whenever a shipping delay threatens a quarterly goal, I look at those folded bags. I remember the humid rain in Baton Rouge. I remember the smell of the cheap motel room. I remember the night I stopped absorbing the damage inflicted by cowards and started auditing the truth. The girl who carried her life in those bags no longer exists. She was replaced by a woman who holds the pen. If you have ever been the designated scapegoat in a family of frauds, I see you. If you have ever been told you are a burden by the exact people who use your silence to survive, you know the weight of that invisible cage. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me about the moment you finally realized the people holding you down were actually terrified of your strength. Subscribe to Aura Vengeance. Share this with someone who needs to hear that walking away is not a sign of defeat. It is a declaration of war. And remember this. Manipulators will always try to control the narrative. They will stage fake engagements, forge documents, and whisper lies to anyone willing to listen. They will build beautiful, hollow empires on your back. Let them talk. Let them perform. The truth does not require a microphone, because eventually the music stops, the audience leaves, and everyone has to face the ledger.